Hello, my name is Neil, and today we're going to explore what makes the Brooklyn Bridge so remarkable. We are in New York. In the late 1860s, it was not yet a single city. Manhattan and Brooklyn lived side by side, but as if separated, connected only by water, steam, and patience. The East River breathed with tides, fog, ice, and constant ship traffic. It did not divide worlds. It tested them. And every day, thousands of people took that test. They boarded ferries, gripped cold railings, pressed bags of goods, toolboxes, letters, sometimes their entire future, against their chests. I often return in my mind to one cold morning in the late 1860s. The air smelled of coal smoke and wet wood. On the Brooklyn Pier, workers in worn coats pushed past one another. Merchants argued over the price of coal. A ferry captain cursed the thick fog rolling in from the river. Manhattan was barely visible through the gray haze. It felt less like a city and more like a rumor. The ferries were both life and weakness. In winter, ice stopped them completely. In summer, fog threw them off course. During storms, people prayed quietly, without ceremony, staring into the water where powerful currents could spin a vessel like driftwood. And the city kept growing. With it grew a quiet frustration. How could you build a future when water constantly stood between its two halves? In those years, the idea of a bridge sounded like an act of defiance, not because bridges did not exist, but because this one demanded the impossible. The East River was deep and fast-moving, crowded with ships. The span would have to be longer than anything built before. The supports would need to stand without obstructing navigation. Any miscalculation would not simply mean failure, it would mean disgrace for the city itself. Early discussions of a permanent crossing had begun in the early 1860s, but seriousness came later. By 1867, the question had become political. Who would take responsibility? Who would sign the papers? Who would endure the criticism if something went wrong? Approvals moved slowly, as if every committee hoped the idea would tire and disappear on its own. Some argued over cost. Others debated the height of the span. Others fought over where the approaches should begin. Too many interests, too many fears, too many people willing to say yes, but unwilling to be accountable if that yes ended in catastrophe. And yet, there came a moment when the decision stopped being theoretical. In January of 1869, construction officially began. I remember how the shoreline seemed to change that year. More stone, more cranes, more men carrying blueprints, and most of all, a feeling that the city was finally taking a step forward. At first, everything looked almost familiar. Stone blocks, scaffolding, the noise of tools. But this was only the surface of the project. Its heart lay hidden beneath the water, inside the caissons. Massive wooden chambers were lowered to the riverbed and filled with compressed air, allowing workers to dig below the waterline. They looked like inverted ships, trapped between water and earth. I descended into one of them once in the early 1870s, when the work was at its most intense. I remember the pressure in my chest, as if my ribs were being squeezed. My ears rang. My voice sounded strange and muffled inside my own head. Dim lamps flickered. Men worked knee-deep in mud, striking the ground with shovels as if they were digging not just for foundations, but for the logic of the future itself. Above us, the river roared and ships passed overhead. And I realized we were literally building the city from below. pulling it upward from under the water. At the time, no one spoke scientifically about caisson disease. Few understood what rapid pressure changes did to blood and nerves, but the symptoms were terrifyingly clear: aches, weakness, paralysis. I saw men who could not straighten their fingers after a shift. I saw others carried away, and by the next day, no one spoke their names. On a construction site, memory is short. Otherwise, the work becomes impossible. And it was during this time, in 1869, that the project lost the man without whom it seemed unthinkable. The chief engineer died before seeing the bridge rise above the water. The city reacted strangely, with grief and suspicion at the same time. Many asked whether he had been the only one who truly understood the project. Would everything collapse now that his hand was gone? But the bridge did not stop. Leadership passed to his son, a young engineer who knew the plans almost by heart. He did not try to play the hero. He worked as if life depended on precision rather than speeches. And in truth, life did. In 1872, caisson disease struck him as well. He survived, but was left confined to his home. I saw him later, lying by a window, his gaze fixed on the towers rising across the river. He could no longer walk the site. He could not speak for long. Yet he continued to lead, through a telescope, through letters, through his wife, who became his presence on the construction ground. People whispered across the city, "How can a bridge be built by a man who cannot leave his bed?" And the bridge answered, in its own slow, stubborn logic, "It can, if he sees farther than the rest." By the mid-1870s, the towers were rising above the water. By 1875, their silhouettes had become part of the skyline. They looked severe and monumental, like stone gateways. There was something cathedral-like about them, not religious, but engineering faith, belief in calculation, in stone, in the idea that human thought could hold empty space in place. Then came the most dramatic phase, the cables. The late 1870s on the bridge were years of height and wind. Steel wires were stretched and spun into enormous cables. Workers walked along temporary pathways high above the river, each step a negotiation with air itself. Ships moved below, sky stretched above, and all around was emptiness that forgave no mistake. The problems were not only in the height, they were also in human decisions. In 1878, it was discovered that part of the wire supplied for the cables was of poor quality. The words sound dry, almost bureaucratic, but behind them lay panic among engineers and silent fear throughout the city. Faulty steel is not something you simply redo. It raises a deeper question. Will the bridge endure decades? Will it withstand crowds? Will it carry future streetcars, wagons, things not yet even imagined? The decision was difficult, but correct. They increased the safety margins. They compensated for weakness with additional wire. They recalculated the loads. Construction slowed. Costs rose. But sometimes safety is not a line in a report. It is character. And then, finally, on the 24th of May, 1883, the bridge opened. I was there. People arrived dressed as if for a celebration of the future. Flags waved, music played. The crowd blended officials and laborers, the wealthy and immigrants. The first steps across the bridge were cautious. People did not quite believe it. The ferry deck did not sway beneath their feet. The water did not tremble. The fog did not demand patience. There was only steel and stone, and another shore that had become a continuation of the street. I remember looking down. The East River flowed as it always had, indifferent. But its meaning had changed. It was no longer an obstacle. And in that moment, I felt for the first time that this bridge was more than an engineering structure. It was a decision the city made about itself. A decision not to wait, not to postpone, not to hope for better weather, but to bind its shores so firmly that even fog no longer had a voice. Today, people cross the Brooklyn Bridge almost without thinking. They take photos, they argue, they rush. But if you stop at the center, where the wind still reminds you of the height, you can hear another sound, distant and old. Shovels striking inside the caissons, the creak of temporary walkways, the controlled breathing of men who walk the cables, knowing the cost of a single wrong step. I often think that this bridge was built not only from stone and steel. It was built from time. 14 years between January of 1869 and May of 1883. From mistakes that were admitted, from pain that was endured, from the stubborn resolve of those who continued when stopping would have been easier. Sometimes I wish I could return to that first year, to 1869, when there was only fog above the river and drawings on paper, just to stand on the shore, listening to the water, while a city gathers the courage to attempt the impossible.
This was Neil. And if you'd like to continue traveling through time with me,
subscribe to the channel so you don't miss our next journey. I promise it will be worth it.